然后他目前是坎城导演双周的顾问，以及科阔影像文化负责人，曾任台北电影节策展人、新加坡国际电影节节目总监。在新加坡时主持东南亚电影学院，那包括资金补助、导演培训等等，并且担任国内外的影展，如鹿特丹、釜山、香港等等的评审委员。那我们请郭敏荣委员上台。语坛的委员包括泰国的作家、电影制作人 Prada Yun，Mr. Prada Yun, please go on the stage. 第3位语坛人是周荣娜导演。那周导演他具有台湾以及菲律宾的那个经验，那也是一个非常知名的导演。谢谢。
Hello, can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. So to have more spontaneous conversation, this one will be conducted in English. And also, we're breaking the mold a bit here. This morning, you heard speeches, but when we first got the task, we decided we're not going to do PowerPoint and speeches. So this is going to be a panel discussion. But at the beginning, I should set the context for our discussion today. So, like the context, what I'm talking about is we should begin by tracing how we come to the topic you are going to see today, storytelling in time of change. When we were brought together for this session, the topic originally was the confluence of literature and video. My first instinct was to replace video to image, as these days it covers a broader range of video creations and production, be it aesthetic or motion. We also asked about the theme this year. It is about using arts to break the barrier of the pandemic and foster exchange of arts and culture, especially across different fields. So we were fighting quite hard to have this removed, so there will be no barrier between us and you. We encourage you later to ask more questions and have more interactions so we can break the literal barrier here. But still, as I was asked to be the moderator for this panel, and I was scratching my head with certain anxiety as I read through the background of Prabda, Ayu, and Rina. Ayu was supposed to be here with us today, but sadly she has other engagement at home and she sent her apology today. Then indeed, we all work in the arts and culture field, but I was undoubtedly the less suited one to moderate something on literature. Then the wonderful Prabda suggests that Ayu, Rina, and himself are all storytellers. And that, I think, is a very wonderful word to connect not just this panel, but who we are here today. We are, in a way, creating narratives to channel our inner security and intimate thoughts, preserve ideas and memories through, say, museums, provoke debate, conjure imaginations, sway opinions, and see dreams. So narrative is important, and it is especially so today, and it will continue to be important. And that's why I add the changing time to complete our topic. Since COVID, I spent a great deal of time working in isolation and observing the unbalanced world order during the pandemic actually triggered my interest in thinking about organizing structure of the world, shifting my focus away from the field of films to that of geopolitics, identity politics, and recently, some people call breakthrough. I consider it more as a threat posed by artificial intelligence. Put it simply, as someone who looks up from the screen and look around the fast-changing world, what's the way to make sense of all that? And for me, that's creating narrative. And creating narrative is how we make sense of this changing society, especially now with a lot of discussion surrounding what we just talked about, and I personally kind of interested in artificial intelligence. I feel more acutely the necessity to keep the ability to think, to discuss, to form narrative, to tell stories, because that's the way to stay human and keep human being humane. It is from this background I would like to start the conversation today. She originally going to be here, and she sent us her PowerPoint, and it would be such a wonderful talk. She shared her thoughts on contemporary Indonesian literature and cinema, but unfortunately, we won't be able to have that today. But still, because we had a discussion before we came here, so I still retain some of the ideas she shared in our discussion, and I will bring into this discussion. So 2 speakers today, Rina sit next to me. She's a filmmaker with both Taiwan and Philippine heritage. And recently, she also, by moving to Malaysia, she has more cultural heritage in her. And Prabda from Thailand, he is a novelist, scriptwriter, visual artist, and run a publishing house, among other pursuits. I was trying to fill everything in, but I found that's not possible. And I sense that your approach to storytelling are slightly different, but maybe you will prove me wrong. I want to first ask you individually to share your creative approach and how your work interact with the society, be it a direct engagement or adapting to different audience profiles. Then I will ask both Rina and Prabda to see your own identity outside an artist. How do you place your work in relation to national boundary, since you have actually quite diverse background inform your creative lives? And how do you see collaboration and exchange across different culture, which is a response to why we are here today? Lastly, I would like to know your view on the changing world. Do you share my observations, or do you pick up clues and activities that we should pay more attention to? So without further ado, I would like to start by inviting Rina first, because you are sitting next to me, to our discussion. Right. Okay, so the starting point, because we talk about your creative inspiration, when I watch your films, I feel it's actually quite personal, and you start by interacting and collecting stories for people living in a sense, in the margin of the society. And I feel your film predominantly is also have quite strong social realism element in that. Is that how you usually start, or do you find inspiration in other form of arts? How do you approach creatively?
I think it's quite instinctive. Before anybody else tell me that I actually have some kind of social realism, or, oh, I talk for the marginalized people, I never really thought about that myself. It kind of comes from people that I know, and then they just inspire me to make up a story in my head, be it's close to what really happened, or maybe it's more of a fictional settlement. But I think for me, it's really just the things that inspire me personally enough to have me make it into a story. So, I don't know, but after having people tell me that, oh, your work is probably close to social activism in a way, I feel the pressure of my film making an impact or not. For example, some of my films are about migrant workers in Taiwan, and sometimes the audience asks me, does it make a difference, you making a film? Does it change their situation? Does it help them? Or, for example, some of my actors are real migrant workers, and sometimes they directly ask me for help. And that kind of real life pressure kind of sinks in, and I wonder sometimes if art is supposed to be outside of real world, or it's supposed to be something to make a push in real world. I think I'm still navigating in that world of putting my place in that, like, what do I want to become? Do I want to become an activist artist? But also some of my favorite artists say art is activism. You cannot really separate the two because you cannot really separate yourself from real world. But I don't really want to define myself into this or that because I feel like I don't want to be defined by any label. For instance, my label in Taiwan would be the new second generation. What does it mean? It means I'm the second generation of immigrants that comes from mostly Southeast Asian backgrounds, be it your mother or your father. But I'm not so sure that I want to be labeled that way. It's like I don't want to be labeled as any kind of artist in a way. So I think for me, art is not necessarily something that I want to make change in the world, but also I don't want to be exempt from that. It's a more instinctive thing. Do I want to do this now? Is it so important to me, so inspiring to me that I want to create a story about that? Yeah, be it in Taiwan, in the Philippines, or in Malaysia. Yeah.
So when other people expect you to react or to have to make a change, how do you respond? Do you kind of push back, or you feel it's kind of case by case? You want to have your own space to preserve that kind of space between your work and you and the society?
I thought about that for a long period of time, that it almost collapsed me because of the pressure, But I think in a way, it also depends. It changes over time. Sometimes I feel pressured. Sometimes, especially when talking to other artists like you and listening to your stories, I feel like, oh, this is art because this is conversation. Ultimately, art is conversation. And I receive from you and you receive from me. And I think in the end, that's what I want to do. I want to converse.
But do you also, because you mentioned about people call you, or in a sense almost label you as a second generation of this new citizen, do you feel that's an unnecessary, it's almost like a label put on you and you can only be identified in that way?
That's an interesting point because now that I live in Malaysia, they don't even have that label. They don't even have a place I can call in case I have any problems. So when I lived there, my perspective also changed a bit. I thought, oh, maybe this label is kind of convenient because in Taiwan, there's like a number I can call in case I have any problems. But then when you live in another country, it doesn't work that way. So I think there's pros and cons. It just depends on how you use it and how you make it into not necessarily a good cause, but something that you can feel happy with. Yeah.
But separately, I know that you still do a certain sense of activism or social engagement that's not relating to filmmaking, and you feel comfortable with that. You don't need to only have one identity. You're an artist, you're a filmmaker.
I'm a lot of things. I'm an awesome wife. And also, for example, the activism thing, it's not necessarily just for example, migrant workers. Right now, me and some of my friends in Taiwan, all of us, the second generation young or not so young kids anymore, we formed this alliance of trying to make sense of where we are and trying to put out something as a conversation also to the world. Sometimes it's articles, sometimes it's posts. So I think, I don't want to be labeled as this or that. And I think it's always exciting to discover new ways to interact with this world. But social media is not really included because I feel like social media has more negative impacts, especially right now in the world. Yeah.
And you mentioned about you have other friends who also come with a sort of a similar background, which is the second generation. How do you observe, in your observation, how do they react to that kind of identity or that label put on them? So this is very kind of Taiwan context. I should explain a little bit more.
Okay, I can explain it. Yeah. So for example, my
I don't
mom
want to explain for you, so.
I'm sorry, I would just...
It's okay, it's okay.
And also, what is that number that you can call when you have a problem?
I'll send it to you. So, for example, my mom is Filipina. My dad is Taiwanese. And I think Zhang Zhen also said that there's over 1 million of us here right now. What is us? Some of us are, it's called the new resident. That's the latest term, the new resident. It means immigrant families that come from mostly Southeast Asian backgrounds or other countries also included. And then me, as the second generation of that new resident, I'm the new second generation. Yeah. So it's very confusing because when I was a kid, when I moved back here when I was 10, I was the foreigner. And then I think my mom was the foreign bride. And then I became I can't remember, there's so many labels, like improving, not really improving, but like 2.0, 3.0, things like that. But the latest is the second new generation, I think. Yeah. What was the question? Oh, how do they reflect on? I think it depends. Like for example, my brother doesn't really care, but also he doesn't speak Tagalog anymore. So he doesn't speak the language anymore.
Which language you mean?
Filipino.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think, for example, I cannot represent all of us because we come from so many different backgrounds. I cannot represent all of the Taiwanese artists as well. So I think I can really only speak for myself and maybe the friends that I know. Most of us are are trying to make sense of our identities, but I think we are also trying to make sense of our own beings as well, especially in Taiwan right now.
I think it's a sense of move beyond the kind of identity the society want to pigeonhole you. Yeah. Just before I move to Prabhada's question, do you have anything you want to respond to this art activism part? Because that's something I sort of pick up from Rina's work outside her film, but she also explained that it's actually sometimes creates some kind of a expectation on her when she wants to keep art just art.
Yeah,
do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've not seen any of Rina's film, but from hearing what you just said, it seems to me that there is a reason why you choose the subjects that you choose to make your films because of your background, and maybe it's not directly political, or maybe you don't think of it as something like a social activism, but because of the background, it makes sense. I mean, from an outsider's, hearing this, it makes sense to me why you choose to do the work that you do. And my question would be that do you feel that that is something that is in a way limiting? Would you ever want to make something that is not related to your background at all, or?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I actually am a woman of many interests. And I don't think, sometimes it feels limiting to be known as something, but I think I am trying not to limit myself with it, try not to self-censor myself in it as well. But yeah, I would, when you talk about self-identifying, and yeah, I think also language is a thing that I am trying to explore right now. For example, my Tagalog is very rusty. Yeah, but I am trying to pick it up and write in it, because I think it's a different kind of mindset. A language is really a different way of thinking for me. Yeah, although I write Tagalog dialogues, but it's totally different when you write in Tagalog words, texts. So I think also, I would like to explore anything.
Language is something very interesting that I would like to later also pose this question to prop it up. But we first talk about the creative part, because coming back to the original question we were given for this session, it was the confluence of literature and film. And I thought, reading your profile, you are so versatile in your creative output, from short stories, novels, you're a showrunner, you're a visual artist, you're also a translator. Did I miss anything? You write scripts, you make films. I hope I haven't missed anything.
He's also half human.
Yes, we said. You also run a publishing house and a coffee shop attached to that. It's not there anymore.
Don't run coffee shops.
Okay, so that's one thing you give up.
Not good business.
You're overachievers. I feel kind of so ashamed in front of you. But anyway, let's come back to the creative. How do you treat all this different format or a medium, even in just writing? Because I suppose writing for short story script, and I know you didn't really write for the series, but a series is a very different form to feature film, but even short film is quite different to feature film. So how do you kind of explore between these different formats?
I think the reason I like to use the word storyteller is exactly because I don't feel that I have a particular what's the word? I have to maybe start over. I have multiple personalities. So my interest in music is different from my, like when I think of myself as somebody who writes, I see myself as a different person than somebody who makes films, for example, because my interest in the arts grew out of a very typical middle-class background, meaning that I consumed a lot of pop culture when I was young, a lot of pop culture from Japan, a lot of pop culture from the States. And I think in the beginning, my interest in all of these things were really just, like a fascination with, the spectacular images on screen. When I read a book, I was impressed with how the writer made me feel. So each thing was different. It reached me in a different way. So when I went to art school, I didn't want to, I couldn't tell myself what I wanted to be particularly. I liked painting because I appreciated some painters' works. I liked sculpture because I liked, some sculptors, but I couldn't answer myself, like what kind of artist I saw myself as. So I didn't want to choose. I first went to a school that was more specialized in design. So I thought I wanted to be a graphic designer at first, because graphic design, they work with books, they work with movie posters. I thought that was a way for me to work with everything that I was interested in. But just 1 year in, I felt that it was so limiting, because graphic design schools tell you how to please the clients. I wanted to learn about, I wanted my options to be open. I wanted to learn about art. I wanted to learn about art history. So I transferred to another school that was more open. And there I realized that I didn't really want to become any particular kind of artist. I just wanted to express something that I was thinking at any moment in time with some kind of medium. So I paint now sometimes. I also like to make objects. Sometimes I wake up with an idea for a film. So every day is kind of, different. And I found that it just so happened that I started to write stories, and then I became first known as a writer. But also I didn't feel like I belonged in that world either. Like when I hung out with a lot of artists, writers, I felt also a little bit not really part of the group. But then again, when I hang out with a lot of painters, I don't feel like I can really relate to some of their sensibilities. So I try to find new ways to express what I'm thinking.
You basically let your creative idea lead you and you find what's the most suited way of expression for that idea you have. Is that correct?
I mean, it started very simply. When I was younger, I just, let's say I wanted to be a filmmaker because I wanted to make films like Steven Spielberg or something.
Your film doesn't look like Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, unfortunately. And I wanted to be a writer because I like this writer's work. It started like that. It wasn't like I had some kind of deep need to express myself as an artist. It started just at, a copycat. I wanted to copy people I liked. And I think it changed over time. I became interested in different things over the years, and also the ways that I want to express myself changed over the years as well. So it's more of a journey, and then each stop is a little bit different for me.
So I think from what you said, there's so many interesting things we can kind of explore a bit more. But I first want to ask about this kind of, because you were reflecting as a creator, but then what I found quite interesting about you said you want to be Steven Spielberg, but your film actually belong more to the film festival world, because I think it's because that's your personal expression, the personal part, your imagination come out in that way. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because I can see from your expression that I may interpret it differently. But I want to pick up that point because you mentioned when we were kind of on stage and discussing, you said some of your creation is actually for quite a niche market. But things you also do, say for example, have a series with Netflix, is actually for a more mainstream commercial market. So how do you add that element in your creation, thinking what kind of audience it belongs? Or you don't think about that?
No, I do. I think for me, the bottom line is still storytelling. So I don't mind working in any, like whether it's mainstream, whether it's festival or art house. Personally, I don't like to label these things because I find that when you encounter a work of art, in painting or movie or whatever, if you get a story that is meaningful to you, and you get that out of what you're consuming, that to me is already enough. So I can watch a Hollywood film and appreciate it if the story is good, if the story is interesting. I always go to the story first. I don't really care about like the production value and all this stuff. I mean, that's important too in a way, but I can appreciate, and even like the movies that people hate, if I watch it and I feel like, that I can relate to this story, or this story can inspire me to think about something else, then it's a good movie for me.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said, and I like the idea, but working in film festival and then a lot of time when we go to film festival, there's also a film market side attached to it. So throughout the year, the discussion we have with our colleagues or sometimes with the sales company is very quickly you watch your films and then it's being, even before the film is made, when it's still in a project stage, it's very quickly identify whether this is for wider audience or this one we need to target for the festival or the niche. I mean, like film just screened in Cannes and then when you read the review very quickly, they will say, okay, this will only go for this kind of film festival, this will have more potential and this and that. And I found this sort of true, but it's also a little bit sad because once you kind of have that label, then people who didn't watch the film read that review and think, okay, I'm not going to watch the film because that film won't make me money and that's not good for my kind of this market or that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very unfortunate. I want to hear how you feel about this, but personally I feel like you know, isolate so many people just by saying that this film is like, you know, like people like to put on the poster, you know, the blurbs like art house favorite. You know, like millions of people are not going to see that film already because of that little quote. So I prefer not knowing anything much about film before I go in to see it.
That's just for me.
Yeah, and then make a judgment for myself whether I like it or not. You don't have to, I don't know who these tomato people are, but you don't really have to trust them.
I was having the same growing up experience. I grew up watching Hollywood war films because my dad enjoyed war films for some reason. And so I grew up watching Band of Brothers, Black Hawk Down, or Parents Trap, White Chick, you know, films like that. And
White Chick is good.
White Chick is good, yeah. And also for the Taiwanese content, I grew up watching 花系列. It's a telenovela kind of series that is very, very dramatic. So to think of that and to think of the films that I make, wow, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, but I also understand what you said because my brother himself, if he sees a festival Laurel on the poster, he will not watch it. Yeah, it's a boring film like yours. Yeah, like mine. Yeah, but I also reflected on what Najib said earlier about commoditizing. Is that a word?
Yeah,
yeah, artworks. Because last year, I made a documentary about artists in Malaysia because my husband and I were both directors and we were thinking, what is an artist per se? So we documented 4 artists from Malaysia and asking them questions. And then one day we went back to my in-laws' house because my father-in-law is a ceramic maker in Malaysia. And then he told us stories about my grandpa-in-law making like ceramic art forms that was so popular. They were in museums, they were in hotels in Singapore, things like that. But he didn't identify himself as an artist. He thought this is a good way to make money. But when you see his work, it is art. It is art, no doubtedly art. And then it made me reflect on myself. So, is it because we are just too comfortable in life that we keep thinking about the existence of artists or what does art mean, what does me being an artist mean, that we forget in the beginning, although it is an expression of self or of story, it is a commodity.
I think what you just described about your grandfather-in-law, I think it used to be another word for that is craftsmen, were basically people who, it's not tradesmen, I think it's craftsmen, like people who just do, I mean, carpenter in a way, we used to call carpenter, but now kind of carpentry itself can also be art. Making pottery is also can be an art. So I think in the days before mass production, these are work, and it's manual work, and it's something you can do for a living, where you have to do to make a living. And then we have the more leisure class, where people who realize the accumulation of their craft and their experience, it should be considered as art, but they themselves may not see it that way. So I think what's quite precious for what you just said is actually the kind of the experience and the crafts accumulated through years after years of work, that it should be acknowledged as art. Yeah, but
yeah, I think it's like craftsmen who they think they're making products that they can sell, but at the same time they're passionate about what they're making. So they want to make something good. I think also that's important, like even if you're making a commercial film, you're serious about making a good film also, but you're also making something, you're making a living, basically. You want it to make a lot of money, but at the same time, you have this kind of, passion to make it a good one as well. So I think that is sometimes missing in, especially in Hollywood, when you can, all you want is to make quantity, not really quality. Like the more characters you can expand in like a DC universe, the better, because you make even more films and more money. I think that's all they care about, and that's the problem with investors who are not really, they don't care so much about the art or the craft. They care more about the profit that they make.
So nowadays, it reminds me, actually, I only have one criteria for film. It's just whether it's a good film or not. I don't differentiate whether it's a commercial film or a festival film, because festival films sometimes don't really... festival film nowadays can also be very formulaic, because they kind of pick up what kind of films can get into film festival, what kind of films, if I produce from my background from this region, I can use this element to attract to programmers. So it's like, now I only have one criteria, which is whether you have originality, whether you have things to say, and whether it's a good film. And that's kind of, just picking up from what you said.
I think it's also a thing when it can cross barriers. Yeah, for example, I think someone earlier mentioned the film Incantation, Zhou. Yeah.
It's a Taiwanese horror film.
Yeah. It really caught a lot of audience in Southeast Asia. Yeah, I see friends that are not from film-related background talking about it, and it really made me so happy, so happy, because I think it's been a long time since Taiwanese content caught that much attention in Southeast Asia. The last time was probably 流星花园.
Well, that's quite a long time ago.
Meteor Garden? F4, F4. Yeah, even in the Philippines, right? Yeah, but that's like decades ago when I was still a child. So I think another thing that is really important for me, especially after the pandemic, now that we are finally opening borders and all, I feel like for me, maybe when I push myself in terms of storytelling, I also consider whether it is universal or not. Is that a word? Whether it can touch people from different backgrounds or not. Yeah.
That's actually the point I want to move on to, because we are here kind of with a mission in a way to foster or to find ways for cultural exchange. But again, go back to the discussion we had before today, and Ayu actually raised quite an interesting point, because you feel, in a sense, a lot of art, film or literature, still very much bound within the nation. So, for example, she mentioned Indonesian films. A lot of time is still being discussed within Indonesia, because it's just not enough people outside Indonesia watching the films, and without translations were being distributed abroad, it's still very much for the local domestic audience. So in your view, what's your take on Ayu's point? Can you see your work or see other people's work to kind of travel beyond, and what kind of things you feel can foster more collaboration, where you don't really think that way? You feel if it's something people will pick up, people will pick up.
In literature, it's much harder to cross borders, but we have seen a lot of the same films. So films, visual arts are usually easier to reach beyond their origins. But I think it also takes a certain kind of I don't want to say like trend, but there is a time when something tends to reach out, just like the right timing for something to reach out. I think it's difficult for anybody to be able to predict which work would do well outside of the country, or which work would become a global sensation. I mean, in literature it's difficult because, as you said, language, I think, each language is a slightly different world, even though we sharing the same world. But when I speak in English, I feel slightly different as a person than when I speak Thai. In Thai, I hardly ever swear, but in English, I like to swear a little bit.
Because you feel that language is more distant from you?
No, it's just more fun to say fuck. And,
Can you say that?
Sounds like a better word. But so I think, and also, like there needs to be some kind of attraction for people to want to reach out to buy, like a book from Thailand, a book from Taiwan. I mean, it sounds, it doesn't sound good when we use the word trend, but I think sometimes that is what is needed for things to go beyond their rhyme.
I noticed when I was reading your the English translation for your short story, and it was noted, I don't know if it's in the book review or something, it was said that the English translation, although very good because the translator won the award for that, but it doesn't really capture the kind of the humor inherent in Thai language. Do you also feel that? For literary works that deals with a lot of puns, like wordplay, is very almost impossible to translate. The same as poetry. You can sort of get the idea of what the writer intended, but I don't think you can appreciate the. I like to use puns, or at least I used to. I use a lot of wordplays and puns that would only make sense in Thai language. So in English, you can try, but it's like translating James Joyce to, I don't know how it is in Chinese, but apparently there is a Ulysses in Chinese. But there's just so much embedded in that work of, like history of the language, the verbal trends of the time and things like this. So it's impossible really to translate.
I feel like even subtitles.
Oh, subtitles.
Yeah, subtitles sometimes are not 100% original to the original context, but it also creates a different kind of interesting universe, also with dubbing.
It's because this is the first time, because this year I work for Ken's director Fortnite, so I watch a lot of films that actually they are not completely ready. So their subtitle are not the final version, and I have to say subtitle is super important because the filmmaker was so keen to make sure what I want to express, what this character said, it's all there. But when you have everything there, it's impossible to read because I was like keep looking at the translation, keep reading the subtitle, and I lost the sense of what the film is about. So it always have to go back to just get the gist of the meaning, and then please don't hang up on this is not for filmmaking, but subtitle is so important. I realized this time. Yeah.
I feel like for this year in Cannes, there were several co-productions with Taiwan that Southeast Asian films co-productions with Taiwan that had great results award-wise. I think it's a great path upwards. I feel though that maybe we could take more initiatives because from what I know now the funds in Taiwan that support those films are like last bucket funds. It's not really that we initiate it with them or we nurture it with them from the beginning, things like that. And I think with more collaboration within the region, not only just for festival films, because I feel like that's what we tend to support fund-wise, but maybe also some of the mainstream content, even if it's telenovela, I feel, is a way for culture to really permeate the society.
That's something we can discuss more on. We have another panel on Thursday, which Tutu will also be there. We will talk about film, resources, reality, and stories. But just before we open up to questions from the audience and other advisors, I have one last question, which is my own interest, because we're supposed to discuss how the pandemic, or now we come out of the pandemic. That's a questionable idea. But I think the world is changing. That's what I think. But how about you? What's your observation? I mean, I'm talking about this as you are creators and artists. What's your sensibility pick up about the world? It can be something very personal, very local, but something under the radar, but then probably something happening that we only care about the grand narratives and we don't know what's happening kind of on an individual, on a local level. Anything you would like to share?
In terms of platforms, I think it's changing clearly.
You mean like Netflix and Disney type
I mean,
thing?
for films.
Okay.
In Thailand, for example, very few people go to the cinema anymore. And I don't know if we should blame them, really, because everybody likes convenience. And there are more quality content now also online, whether it be YouTube or Netflix or whatever. I mean, I watch a lot of YouTube because on YouTube you get a lot of information, and there are a lot of people who like to tell you, I watch a lot of history channel and philosophy channels and things like that. So for me, it's very informative and very useful. And people spend a lot of time online. So in a way, you can say, it's inevitable that standalone cinemas or even like complexes now struggling. But then you have to ask, then what about the people who want to make films that are shown, in the cinema? Where would they have a platform? Now people worry about AI, and I think it will, as you mentioned, I think it will have some impact on the industry, but not in the creative way, because I feel like when people discuss AI now in the arts, it's always, it's like used for things that you don't need artists to do anyway. You write, papers and things like this. It's not creative work, because what AI does is it collects information online from people anyway. I tried, when there was like this buzz about ChatGPT, I went on it and I tried to ask it to write poetry and write short stories, and just to experiment to see what it would come up with. And it's just very formulaic. I asked it to write something about Thailand. Oh, Thailand is a great country, smiley people, good food, that kind of thing. So the government can use that.
Okay.
Not artists and not creative people. I think it will actually give artists even, more, and then people would maybe pay more attention to artists because they will get something that is original or, unpredictable or surprising, not something that is predictable. And, it's really it's like using Illustrator to draw a straight line. I mean, it's nice because drawing a straight line can be laborious and, so just ask a computer to do it. But you don't need people to do that anyway. So I'm more interested in what creative people and artists will come up with once all this AI is, everywhere. I have a feeling I'm more enthusiastic about the future in regards to AI with the arts, because I feel like we're probably going to see more, exciting new stuff coming out of artists.
I'm a bit more pessimistic.
Mine is a more personal take as an audience, I think. I feel like during and after, is it after the pandemic already? During and now, people don't want to watch sad content. Yeah, people want to watch content that makes them relax, well, at least for me, and feel good about. And I think that kind of, even for me, I watch both commercial and art house films, but sometimes I find myself a bit stressed just opening Mubi and, watching the titles and feel like, oh, I'm gonna feel so sad after watching this. And then I turn on YouTube or Netflix and watch the less brain dead. Most brain dead thing I can watch. But also for audience in general, I think that's something that I observed. And also, I'm not so sure if it's the physical border thing and the physical lockdown thing that caused this, but I feel like some of the contents in each countries are turning more inward. There are more local content coming out. There are more local interest in local content coming out. And some of it is surely like, oh, our country's the great, our country's the best, things like that. But also there are audience, because they have more interest in local content, they do have more nuanced and more demand for a more complex content that really reflects what's happening inside the country. So I think it's a two-way sword. It can go really extreme, propaganda-ish, but I don't think we should underestimate the audience ever, although I like to watch brain-dead material, but I'm not brain-dead after all. So I think we are walking into unknown waters. I'm not so sure how the market will be like exactly. I'm not so sure I know about that market that well anyway. But I feel like it creates more opportunities as well. And I think for audiences in general, it's important that we reflect what is happening. It's important for us to feel like we can see ourselves in the content, but also I think it's also exciting to see lives in other countries in a way. So I think for me, the pandemic is like I cannot put a word to it, but for me, I feel like it's an opportunity, but also maybe it's a bit closed off for now.
At the moment, I've sort of blocked it out from my mind, and probably wait for a few years, I will come back to properly process what's happening during this period of time. So we have some time for one or two questions, if any of the advisors or the audience want to respond to what we just shared. Oh, okay. Do we have a microphone?
Oh, okay. So thank you for both of the speakers. My name is Nacha. I'm actually half Thai, half Taiwanese, so I'm kind of like Xinzuming or new second generation as well. But somehow I don't fit the criteria they have by the state that well. But I'm currently studying in National Zhengzhi University doing my master, and my thesis is about new second generation and how they use the social media platform to advocate their life experience. So my question for Rina is that you mentioned that you collect storytellings from people around you, and then you kind of make it into the films. And I want to ask, like, while you approach them, do you think that the stories that they tell you is like very authentic, or did they change anything in order to fit into what you're looking for?
I understand what you're saying from a research perspective. To be honest, I don't actively look for stories, so I don't actively interview them. So maybe in that sense, it doesn't really matter to me if they are being their authentic self or not. When I make a documentary, that matters. Mm-hmm. So if I make a documentary about them, it will take me more time because I don't want them to put on a show in film. But for me, when I write fiction, it really just matters to me, like the elements that touches me personally. For example, a short film I made way back is about me as a child, generally. But my grandmother didn't live long enough to meet me, so I didn't have that story element. But I had a good friend that went through her grandmother and her mom having big fights. So that for me really like touches the nerve because, wow, how do you choose between your grandma and your mom? So that is something that I feel like even if she's lying, it still touches me. So yeah, of course, I think especially when you interview someone for research purposes or for documentaries, they will not be 100% their authentic selves in camera. But I feel like there are ways to try to approach them or try to listen and discern what is and what is not. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Can I ask another question, if it's possible? Because earlier you mentioned that people nowadays do not like to watch sad films or anything that makes them feel depressed or like stressed. But in the same time, you also mentioned that nowadays the world, they are trying to like present their local context or like the local culture and local value in the films. But do you think that by presenting the local value or local situation sometimes can bring out the dark side of the society? And do you think that is something that people nowadays want to have the world to see the dark side of a local society or something? Or do you think they always kind of like avoid that part or only present the good side? That's just something I'm curious.
Are you talking about something in particular?
For the COVID, to relate with the topic today, I realized that I think there is a Taiwanese-made film about COVID or something related to pandemic, and in the movie, what was the actor Wang something? He's quite famous. And then in the movie, I only watched the trailer. Yeah, I think it's something 疫情 or it's on the cinema. It's on the cinema currently. And I feel like I only watched the trailer, so I personally feel like it's very commercialized. But I know, but I read the summary or the abstract of the movie is trying to raise awareness of the people that contribute to the pandemic, also to SARS back then that happened in Taiwan, and I feel like it kind of bring out the negative side of how Taiwan dealt with the situation back then, and a lot of like doctors or nurses were like sacrificed themselves in order to cure the patient. But that part, the sad part or negative part, is not really being focused or elaborated. But still, only the good side of how hardworking the country is, or how hardworking people in the hospitals are dealing with the pandemic. So I feel like it's still focusing on the bright side. So I'm just wondering, like, does that have any? Am I talking too much?
Actually, I haven't watched the film because I just
only watched the
last night.
too. Yeah.
And I am going to watch it in the cinemas. I hope it's still on. But I understand what you're trying to ask. I think when I say that people doesn't want to watch sad material, I think it's the initial image that deters people. For example, I'm going to say my brother again. My brother, when he sees documentary, it's a no. Yeah, but so when people see it's an art film, it's a no, because it kind of portrays a sad image. So that's what I said. But I think in terms of the dark side in society, I don't think it's something that will turn the audience away. I think especially now it may be something that will bring the audience in, because the audience will be curious on how you portrayed it. So I think as long as it's a good film, it doesn't really matter if you have like dark sides of the society in it, as long as it's a good film, it's interesting, it's good storytelling. I do think that sometimes it's not really how authentic it is to the real event that is what makes a film good. But I haven't seen the film, so I cannot really answer to that, but I will see it.
I heard the pitch of that film. I also haven't watched the film, but I think it's probably what we need to think. What I would say is a lot of film nowadays, when they're still in a script stage, they are being conceived with the market in their mind. The reason I know the film is because I know the producer, and the producer and the sales company talk about the film, so I know it's going to be a heartwarming, and everyone is going to be so... I mean, basically, they want people to cry at the end of the film. So it's kind of target a very specific market, and that target is not because they know there's only this side of the story, but in a way, they want a more uplifting story. At the same time, they also feel that's the way to get the audience into the market. So nowadays, it's like film itself doesn't exist just as a story. There's a lot of, put it more cynically, calculation around it, because it's actually take quite a lot of money to get a film made. So I think those kind of elements also need to take into consideration, yeah.
Yeah, I think you touch on something that the general public usually are not aware of, because it's the business side of the industry. But it's very true, because, for example, when people think of Netflix, and if they know that you're making something with Netflix, they're always thinking, oh, why don't you make something like Squid Game, or something that would be a worldwide sensation, that kind of thing. But the reality is that Netflix themselves, they don't want the local productions to be like that. It's not their goal. I mean, something like Squid Game is like a fluke, like they didn't expect that. What they want really is to make contents that the local people like, so that they will get more subscribers. So this is just basic business model. I mean, and they don't care about pushing Thai contents to go global, this kind of thing. I mean, this is all the image that they have. Like, for example, Netflix has an image that they make very dark series, very dark films. But the company itself, they don't want to make dark stuff. Like when I was working on the series previously, the only thing they kept telling me when we were writing, when we were preparing for production, they kept saying, not dark. We don't want anything dark. But then, then people would just tell me, but it's Netflix, you have to make it dark. Because they have this, this
that
image.
That message hasn't arrived in Taiwan.
What?
That message hasn't arrived in Taiwan. I think we're still very much in this thriller, dark, everyone, yeah.
Yeah, but that they kept, that's like almost, their only comment is we don't want to see anything dark.
But I think Netflix always positioned themselves as a kind of a technology company. They're not really a kind of film.
Yeah.
They don't see themselves as a film company. They don't see as a sort of creator in a way. Yeah. So I hope that explained, that answered your question. I think we are probably running out of time. Yeah. Yes, I think so. Yes, I see the nod. We will still be around, so if you have questions, welcome to approach Propta or Relina. And thank you very much for sharing this hour with us, and we look forward to the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.